My parents kicked me out and gave my inheritance to my spoiled sister. I never imagined that refusing to pay for my sister's lavish wedding would cost me everything I thought was mine. Michael, 18, stood in the doorway of what had been his family home for his entire life, clutching a single backpack containing everything he now owned. The rain mirrored the tears he refused to let fall as his father slammed the door shut behind him, the sound echoing like a gunshot through the quiet suburban street. Just hours earlier, he had been a high school graduate with plans to attend community college while living at home, saving money for his future. Now he was homeless, penniless, and utterly alone. The confrontation that led to this moment had been brewing for months. Michael's younger sister, Tiffany, had recently gotten engaged to her wealthy boyfriend, and she was planning the most extravagant wedding their small town had ever seen. The problem? Her fiancé's family had refused to pay for what they considered an unnecessary display of wealth, and Tiffany had turned to their parents for financial support. When Michael's parents announced they would be taking out a second mortgage on their home to fund the $75,000 wedding, Michael had spoken up. He questioned the wisdom of jeopardizing their financial security for a single-day celebration. He suggested a more modest approach, perhaps even offering to contribute some of his own savings from his part-time job to help with a smaller affair. The reaction had been immediate and severe. His mother had accused him of being selfish and jealous of his sister. His father had called him ungrateful, reminding Michael that they had supported him his entire life. Tiffany had played the victim, crying that her own brother didn't want her to have the wedding of her dreams. But the true breaking point came when Michael refused to sign a document his parents presented to him. It was a contract stating he would contribute $10,000 toward the wedding, to be paid from the inheritance they had always promised would be his one day. When he questioned why his future inheritance was being used now and why Tiffany wasn't expected to contribute anything herself, his parents' faces had hardened with an emotion Michael had never seen directed at him before: pure, unadulterated anger. His father had risen from his chair, his voice cold as ice, as he told Michael that if he wouldn't support family decisions, perhaps he wasn't part of the family anymore. His mother had simply pointed toward the door, her eyes avoiding his as she told him to pack his things and leave. Tiffany had watched from the doorway of the living room, a small, triumphant smile playing on her lips as Michael was banished from the only home he had ever known. Now, standing in the pouring rain, Michael tried to process what had just happened. His parents had always been strict, but he never imagined they would disown him over money. The inheritance they had mentioned, money from his grandparents that had been set aside for both children, was supposed to be split equally. He had always assumed it would be there for his future, for college, for a down payment on a house someday. The fact that they wanted to use it now for Tiffany's wedding had been shocking enough, but being cast out for questioning it was beyond comprehension. Michael pulled out his phone, his fingers trembling as he scrolled through his contacts. Friends from high school, but most were away at college or still living with their own families. He couldn't bring himself to call any of them and admit what had happened. Pride kept him from revealing the depth of his parents' betrayal and his own foolish pride in standing up to them. The rain intensified as Michael began walking toward the center of town, his backpack growing heavier with each step. He had $47 in his wallet, a nearly empty gas tank in his old car, and the clothes on his back. The future he had carefully planned had evaporated in a matter of hours, replaced by a terrifying uncertainty that settled in his stomach like a stone. As he reached the town square, Michael noticed the lights were still on at the 24-hour diner. He pushed open the door, the bell announcing his arrival to the few late-night patrons inside. The warmth of the restaurant provided temporary relief from the rain, but Michael knew he couldn't stay there forever. As he slid into a booth, the reality of his situation began to sink in. He was truly alone, with no home, no family support, and no clear path forward. The only thing he knew for certain was that his life had changed forever, and the comfortable existence he had taken for granted was gone, possibly never to return. The first week after being disowned was a blur of couch surfing and uncertainty. Michael spent 2 nights in his car before a former classmate took pity on him and offered his spare room for a few days. The generosity was appreciated but temporary, as his friend's parents made it clear Michael couldn't stay indefinitely. Each night, Michael would lie awake, replaying the confrontation with his family, wondering if there was something he could have said or done differently. During this time, Michael made a discovery that would change everything. While checking his email at the local library, he found a message from his father's lawyer, apparently sent in error to Michael's old account. The subject line read, "Estate Planning, Henderson Family," and curiosity compelled him to open it. What he read made his blood run cold. The email contained details of a revised will that his parents had drafted just weeks before the wedding confrontation. According to the document, they had changed their estate plan to leave everything to Tiffany, completely disinheriting Michael. The family home, the savings accounts, the retirement funds, and most importantly, the inheritance from his grandparents, all of it would now go to Tiffany. The reason cited in the lawyer's notes was Michael's demonstrated lack of family loyalty and unwillingness to support family obligations. Michael had to leave the library, his hands shaking so violently he could barely use the computer. He stumbled outside, leaning against the brick wall as waves of nausea washed over him. This wasn't just an impulsive decision made in anger. His parents had planned to cut him out of their will long before the argument about the wedding. The confrontation had merely been the catalyst they needed to execute a plan that had already been in motion. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. His parents hadn't just overreacted in the heat of an argument. They had systematically planned to disown him, to erase him from their family and their financial future. All those years of being told he was loved, of being promised a share of the family assets, had been a lie. The inheritance from his grandparents, money they had explicitly wanted shared between their grandchildren, would now go entirely to Tiffany, who had never worked a day in her life and had always been treated as the golden child. That night, Michael couldn't sleep. He paced the small bedroom he was borrowing, his mind racing with questions. When had his parents decided to do this? Had they ever truly loved him, or had they always seen him as secondary to Tiffany? How could they justify taking money that was meant for both grandchildren and giving it all to one? The next morning, Michael made a decision. He needed to see the will for himself to confirm what he had read in the email. He called the lawyer's office, pretending to be his father's assistant, and requested a copy of the most recent estate planning documents. To his surprise, the receptionist agreed to email them, citing that they had been trying to reach Mr. Henderson for final approval. When the documents arrived in Michael's inbox, his worst fears were confirmed. The will was dated 3 months before his disownment, and it was even worse than the email had suggested. Not only was Michael completely disinherited, but there was a clause stating that if Tiffany predeceased their parents, everything would go to her future children, effectively cutting off any possibility of Michael ever receiving anything from his family's estate. As Michael read through the legal language, a cold clarity settled over him. This wasn't just about the wedding money. This was about his parents' long-standing preference for his sister and their willingness to sacrifice their son's future for their daughter's desires. The inheritance from his grandparents, which should have been split equally, was now entirely Tiffany's. The family home that Michael had grown up in, that he had helped maintain over the years, would one day belong to his sister. Everything he had assumed would be his to share with his future family was gone. The anger that Michael had been suppressing since being kicked out finally surfaced, hot and overwhelming. But beneath the anger was a profound sense of betrayal that cut deeper than any physical wound. His parents hadn't just made a financial decision.
They had made an emotional one, declaring in legal terms that their daughter was more valuable than their son. With this knowledge, Michael's priorities shifted. It was no longer about finding a temporary place to stay or figuring out how to get by until he could reconcile with his family. It was about building a life completely independent of them, of proving that he could succeed without their help or their money. The inheritance they had taken from him would become a motivator, not a source of bitterness. Michael spent the next few days making plans. He found a room to rent in a shared house, using the last of his savings to pay the first month's rent and deposit. He got a second job, working nights at a warehouse while continuing his shifts at the restaurant during the day. He enrolled in community college, paying out of pocket for his first semester, determined to get an education on his own terms. The days were long and exhausting, but with each passing week, Michael felt a growing sense of independence. He was building something from nothing, creating a life that belonged entirely to him, free from his parents' strings and conditions. The anger gradually transformed into determination, the hurt into resolve. He would show them that their decision to disown him hadn't broken him, it had freed him. 2 years passed in a blur of work, study, and relentless determination. Michael's life had transformed from that of a homeless teenager to a focused young adult with clear goals. The room he rented in the shared house had become his sanctuary, a small space filled with textbooks, a second-hand computer, and the few belongings he had accumulated since being disowned.
The walls were covered with study schedules, motivational quotes, and a large calendar counting down to his graduation. The community college experience had been challenging but rewarding. Michael had chosen to study business management, partly because it aligned with his natural aptitude for organization and partly because it felt like a direct response to his parents' poor financial decisions. He excelled in his courses, maintaining a perfect GPA while working 2 jobs to support himself. His professors noticed his dedication and often offered extra opportunities, including a part-time internship with a local business consulting firm. The internship became a turning point. Michael's supervisor, Mr. Thompson, a retired executive who volunteered his time to mentor young students, quickly recognized Michael's potential. He saw beyond the tired young man who arrived early and stayed late, recognizing the intelligence and work ethic that drove him. When Michael shared a small portion of his story, just enough to explain his drive without revealing the full extent of his family's betrayal, Mr. Thompson became even more invested in his success. Under Mr. Thompson's guidance, Michael developed not just academic knowledge, but practical business skills. He learned about financial planning, investment strategies, and how to build a business from the ground up. The older man became something of a surrogate father figure, offering advice that Michael's biological father had refused to provide. When Michael graduated with honors, Mr. Thompson was there in the front row, cheering louder than anyone else. With his associate's degree completed, Michael faced a decision: transfer to a 4-year university or enter the workforce full-time. The logical choice would have been to continue his education, but practical considerations won out. He was tired of living paycheck to paycheck, tired of the constant worry about making rent. Mr. Thompson offered him a full-time position at the consulting firm, and Michael accepted, planning to continue his education through night classes once he was more financially stable. The work at the consulting firm was demanding but exhilarating. Michael found he had a natural talent for identifying inefficiencies in businesses and developing practical solutions. He worked with small companies in the area, helping them streamline operations and improve profitability. The success of these businesses became his success, and with each satisfied client, his confidence grew. During this time, Michael made a conscious effort to avoid any contact with his family. He had heard through mutual acquaintances that Tiffany's wedding had indeed happened, though not as lavishly as originally planned. The second mortgage his parents had taken out had apparently caused financial strain, but they had gone through with anyway. Michael felt a brief pang of something, not quite regret, but perhaps nostalgia for the family he had lost, before pushing the feeling aside and focusing on his work. As Michael's reputation in the business community grew, so did his opportunities. After 2 years at the consulting firm, he was approached by a former client who wanted to start a new venture. The client, a successful entrepreneur in his own right, was impressed with Michael's analytical mind and work ethic. He offered Michael a partnership in a new business consulting company specifically targeting startups and small businesses looking to scale. The offer was both thrilling and terrifying. It would mean leaving the security of his current job, taking a risk on an unproven venture. But it also represented the kind of opportunity Michael had been working toward, the chance to build something of his own, to create wealth and success on his terms rather than depending on an inheritance that had been stolen from him. Mr. Thompson encouraged him to take the leap, reminding Michael that calculated risks were often necessary for significant growth. With his mentor's blessing and a detailed business plan, Michael accepted the partnership, investing his savings and taking out a small business loan to cover his share of the startup costs. The first year of the new venture was challenging. Michael worked longer hours than ever before, often sleeping only a few hours a night as he and his partner built their client base. There were moments of doubt, times when the financial pressure felt overwhelming. But with each small success, a client who achieved significant growth, a referral that led to new business, Michael's confidence in their venture grew. By the end of the second year, their consulting firm was profitable enough that Michael was able to pay off his business loan early and begin investing in his own future. He bought a small condo, the first property he had ever owned outright. It wasn't the family home he had grown up in, but it was his, purchased with money he had earned through his own efforts. As Michael stood on the balcony of his new home, looking out at the city lights, he reflected on how far he had come. The angry, hurt teenager who had been kicked out of his parents' home was gone, replaced by a confident young man who had built a life from nothing. The inheritance he had lost still stung when he thought about it, but it no longer defined him. He was creating his own legacy, one that couldn't be taken away by anyone. The invitation arrived unexpectedly, a cream-colored envelope with elegant gold lettering that looked out of place in Michael's mailbox. His sister Tiffany was getting married again, this time to a different wealthy fiancé, as the first marriage had ended in divorce after less than a year. The invitation was addressed to Michael Henderson and guest, a formal courtesy that felt more like an insult than an olive branch after 5 years of silence. Michael considered throwing it away, but curiosity, and perhaps a small remaining ember of familial connection, compelled him to open it. The wedding was to be held in 6 months at an exclusive country club, with a reception that would undoubtedly rival the first one in extravagance. As he read the details, Michael couldn't help but wonder how his parents could afford another lavish celebration, especially after taking out that second mortgage years ago. The invitation became a topic of conversation at his next meeting with Mr. Thompson, who had remained his mentor and friend through the years. The older man listened carefully as Michael explained the situation, then asked a simple question: "Do you want to go?" Michael wasn't sure how to answer. Part of him wanted to attend, to show his family that he had succeeded despite their rejection. Another part of him wanted to ignore the invitation completely, to continue building his life without them. Mr. Thompson suggested that the decision wasn't about his family, but about Michael himself. What would attending or not attending mean for his own peace of mind and closure? In the end, Michael decided to attend the wedding, but not as a guest. He would go as an observer, to see with his own eyes how his family's choices had played out over the years. He RSVP'd for one with no intention of bringing a date or staying for the entire reception. This was about information gathering, not reconciliation. In the months leading up to the wedding, Michael made subtle inquiries about his family's financial situation. Through business connections and old acquaintances, he learned that his parents had indeed struggled financially after the first wedding. The second mortgage had put them in a precarious position, and they had been forced to dip into their retirement savings to stay afloat. His grandparents' inheritance, which should have provided security, had been spent maintaining the lifestyle Tiffany expected. Tiffany, meanwhile, had developed a reputation for being difficult and entitled. Her first marriage had ended when her husband's family cut off financial support, unwilling to fund her increasingly extravagant lifestyle. She had moved back in with their parents, who continued to enable her behavior despite their own financial challenges. The new fiancé was apparently wealthy enough to satisfy her demands, at least for now. The day of the wedding arrived with unseasonably warm weather. Michael dressed in a tailored suit he had purchased for business meetings, the kind of quality his father had always appreciated but could never afford for himself. As he drove to the country club, Michael felt a strange mix of emotions: anticipation, anxiety, and a detached curiosity about what he would find. The ceremony was beautiful in a generic, expensive way. Tiffany looked radiant in a designer gown that probably cost more than Michael's first car. His parents sat in the front row, their faces beaming with pride, though Michael noticed the fine lines of worry around their eyes and the slight grayness of his father's hair that hadn't been there 5 years ago. Michael stayed in the back, observing from a distance. He saw no reason to make himself known, to disrupt the illusion of family happiness that his parents had so carefully constructed. During the reception, he moved through the crowd like a ghost, unnoticed by most, as he gathered information about the people who had once been his family. What he discovered was both enlightening and sad. His parents had aged significantly, the stress of their financial situation evident in their posture and expressions. They still lived in the family home, but Michael learned from a talkative relative that the house was in disrepair, his parents unable to afford the maintenance it needed. Their retirement accounts were nearly depleted, the inheritance from their grandparents long gone. Tiffany was as self-absorbed as ever, holding court with her new wealthy friends and barely acknowledging her parents unless she needed something. Michael watched as she dismissed their concerns about the cost of the reception with a wave of her hand, telling them not to worry since her new husband's family was paying for everything. The most revealing moment came when Michael overheard his parents talking with one of his aunts. They were discussing their financial situation, their voices low but urgent. The second mortgage had been refinanced multiple times, each time with less favorable terms. They had taken out personal loans to cover Tiffany's expenses between her first and second marriages. Their dream of retirement had been replaced with the reality of working well into their 70s with no savings to fall back on. As Michael listened, he felt a complex mix of emotions. There was no satisfaction in seeing his parents struggle, despite what they had done to him. Instead, he felt a profound sadness that their favoritism had led them to this precarious position. They had sacrificed their own financial security and their relationship with their son for a daughter who gave little in return. Before leaving, Michael caught a glimpse of himself in a mirror behind the head table. The reflection showed a confident, successful man who had built a life from nothing. The angry teenager who had been kicked out of his home 5 years earlier was gone, replaced by someone who had proven his worth through hard work and determination. He didn't need his parents' approval or their inheritance anymore. He had created his own success. As Michael walked out of the country club, leaving the celebration behind, he felt a sense of closure that he hadn't expected. Seeing his family's situation firsthand hadn't brought him the satisfaction he might have anticipated. Instead, it had reinforced his decision to build his own life separate from their drama and poor financial choices. The inheritance they had taken from him no longer mattered. He was creating wealth and security on his own terms, with values that were entirely his own. 3 years after Tiffany's second wedding, Michael sat in his corner office overlooking the city skyline, reviewing the quarterly reports for his consulting firm. The business had grown beyond his wildest expectations, now employing over 20 people and serving clients across the country. At 28, Michael had achieved a level of success that seemed almost unimaginable to the homeless teenager he had been a decade earlier. His personal life had flourished as well. He was in a serious relationship with a woman named Rachel, a pediatrician he had met through a mutual friend. They had purchased a home together in a nice neighborhood, and they were discussing marriage and starting a family. Michael had built the stable, secure life he had always wanted, created through his own efforts rather than inherited wealth. The relationship with his parents remained non-existent. After attending Tiffany's wedding, Michael had made no effort to reconnect, and they had not reached out to him. He occasionally heard news through the grapevine. His father had been forced to postpone retirement due to their financial situation. His mother had developed health issues that their limited insurance barely covered. Tiffany's second marriage had ended in divorce as well, and she had moved back home again, continuing to drain their already strained resources. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, interrupting a meeting with potential investors. Michael's assistant put through the call, explaining that it was his mother and that it sounded urgent. For a moment, Michael considered refusing to take it, maintaining the distance he had carefully cultivated for years. But something in his assistant's expression made him reconsider. The voice on the other end of the line was hesitant, unfamiliar after so many years of silence. His mother started with small talk, asking about his life, his work, if he was happy. Michael answered politely but briefly, waiting for the real reason for her call. When it finally came, it was exactly what he had expected, yet somehow still surprising in its directness. His father had suffered a heart attack, and the medical bills were overwhelming. Their insurance covered only a fraction of the costs, and with their depleted savings and maxed-out credit cards, they were facing bankruptcy. Tiffany, despite still living at home, contributed nothing to the household expenses and had refused to help with the medical bills. They were desperate, and they had nowhere else to turn. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon, interrupting a meeting with potential investors. Michael's assistant put through the call, explaining that it was his mother and that it sounded urgent. For a moment, Michael considered refusing to take it, maintaining the distance he had carefully cultivated for years. But something in his assistant's expression made him reconsider. The voice on the other end of the line was hesitant, unfamiliar after so many years of silence. His mother started with small talk, asking about his life, his work, if he was happy. Michael answered politely but briefly, waiting for the real reason for her call. When it finally came, it was exactly what he had expected, yet somehow still surprising in its directness. His father had suffered a heart attack, and the medical bills were overwhelming. Their insurance covered only a fraction of the costs, and with their depleted savings and maxed-out credit cards, they were facing bankruptcy. Tiffany, despite still living at home, contributed nothing to the household expenses and had refused to help with the medical bills. They were desperate, and they had nowhere else to turn. Michael listened silently as his mother laid out their situation, her voice cracking with emotion. She didn't apologize for the past, didn't acknowledge the pain they have caused him or the injustice of disinheriting him. Instead, she appealed to his sense of family duty, reminding him that his father was still his father, regardless of their differences. When she finished speaking, Michael took a moment to gather his thoughts. The anger he might have expected to feel was absent, replaced by a calm clarity. He asked a few practical questions about his father's condition, the medical expenses, their current income, and debts. His mother, surprised by his business-like approach, answered hesitantly at first, then with increasing detail as she realized he was actually considering her request. After hanging up, Michael spent the rest of the day in deep thought. He discussed the situation with Rachel that evening, laying out all the factors without bias or emotion. She listened carefully, then asked what he wanted to do, not what he felt he should do. The question helped Michael clarify his own feelings and priorities. The next day, Michael called his mother back. He agreed to help, but with conditions that would protect both his financial interests and his emotional well-being. He would pay the medical bills directly to the hospital and providers, not to his parents. He would require full transparency about their financial situation, including access to all accounts and bills. He would also require that they meet with a financial counselor he would provide to create a sustainable budget and plan for their future. Most importantly, Michael made it clear that his help was not an invitation back into his life. He would maintain boundaries that protected his peace of mind and his relationship with Rachel. He was not offering forgiveness or forgetting the past, but rather making a decision based on his current values, not their previous actions. His parents agreed to his conditions, desperation outweighing pride. Over the next few months, Michael worked with them to stabilize their financial situation. He paid off the medical bills, negotiated with creditors, and set up a structured payment plan for their remaining debts. He arranged for the financial counseling, though he was disappointed when his parents resisted implementing many of the recommended changes. Tiffany, predictably, was angry about Michael's involvement. She saw it as an intrusion into her life and a judgment on her lack of contribution to the household. She and Michael had a tense conversation during one of his visits to his parents' home, her defensiveness and entitlement on full display. Michael remained calm, refusing to engage in arguments or justify his decisions to her. A year after his father's heart attack, Michael stood with Rachel at their own wedding, a modest but meaningful celebration surrounded by friends who had become his chosen family. His parents were there, sitting quietly in the back, their presence awkward but tolerated. Tiffany had declined to attend, still angry about the changes Michael had implemented in their parents' financial life. As Michael exchanged vows with Rachel, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. The inheritance he had lost as a teenager had seemed like the most important thing in the world at the time. But the experience of being disowned had forced him to discover his own strength, to build values and a life that were authentically his. The money he had provided to his parents wasn't an investment in their relationship or a down payment on future reconciliation. It was a decision based on his own principles, a recognition that helping them was the right thing to do for his own peace of mind, regardless of whether they deserved it or appreciated it. In the end, Michael realized that being kicked out of his home and disinherited had been a gift in disguise. It had freed him from the expectations and strings that came with his family's money, allowing him to create success on his own terms. The inheritance they had taken from him had been replaced by something far more valuable: self-respect, integrity, and the knowledge that he had built a life that no one could take away. As the reception began, Michael looked around at the people who had supported him through the years. Mr. Thompson, business colleagues, friends who had become family. These were the people who had helped shape the man he had become, not the biological family who had cast him aside when he refused to conform to their expectations. The inheritance they had stolen from him was insignificant compared to the wealth of relationships and experiences he had gained in its place. As the reception began, Michael looked around at the people who had supported him through the years. Mr. Thompson, business colleagues, friends who had become family. These were the people who had helped shape the man he had become, not the biological family who had cast him aside when he refused to conform to their expectations. The inheritance they had stolen from him was insignificant compared to the wealth of relationships and experiences he had gained in its place.